When I was much younger, I had a very traumatizing event that happened to me and my family. We don't speak about it. I have tried to ask my parents about it, but they refuse to acknowledge that it happened. I've had to come to terms with it myself after years and years, but it did happen. I don't know what it was. I do know some things here and there about Dogman, Bigfoots, Jersey Devils, and the likes. It could have been a Dogman in my opinion, but I just feel like it was more evil than anything else. It looked so evil. I hear stories of Dogmen doing evil things, but are not always described as evil looking. I'll let you and your readers judge for yourselves. Growing up, I've noticed that I am sort of a magnet to the paranormal. In my teens, we moved to this old farmhouse that was built in like 1901 or something. Had multiple renovations done in the time since, but was still at its core a very, very old house. I've had numerous experiences with hearing voices in the dark, seeing shadows come in and out of my room, feeling spots of cold air moving around the house. Stuff like that. My parents haven't really noticed too much. Either they're just in total denial of all things outside the realm of eyesight, or they're just not speaking about it. As far as my experience and what happened, here it goes. Family and I lived outside of Dayton, Ohio for most of my childhood. We lived in a normal suburban area, but I lived next to an empty plot of land. We had rows of houses behind us and next to us. Our house layout is like this. You walk into the living room from the street. To the left is the kitchen. To the right is the living room. If you go straight, it leads you down a long hallway with bedrooms that goes right and left. The farthest door is straight and it leads to a bathroom. There's also a room on the left and the back door is to the right. I hope it's not too confusing to understand. I was in the living room playing with my toys at the time. I was in 3rd or 4th grade, so maybe 8 or 9 years old. My dad was watching TV, and my mom was in the kitchen. It was currently dark out. I can't remember if we had just finished having dinner or we were about to have dinner. Quick note to add that all of our windows had curtains. The ones in the living room were open completely. If you looked out, you'd be seeing part of our yard and the empty plot of land beyond that. The curtains by our back door were always closed. Anyway, I distinctly remember hearing these strange scraping sounds by our back door. At first, my parents just glanced over at each other, unsure of what to make of it. A few seconds go by of this noise going on, and my dad curiously gets up and goes to check by the back door. He walks all the way back there and moves to the curtain out of the way, yells something like, "Ah!" and jogs back to the living room. Well, he didn't jog, he ran. He's so pale, I remember thinking he was sick. I'd never seen my dad look like that before, not that young. My mom is starting to freak out over his reaction. He is just standing there, not even speaking. I'm starting to get scared by how my dad is acting. Just then, a loud creak came from the living room window to our right. Pressing so hard against the glass was the most vile, wretched, and demonic-looking wolf head I've ever seen. I've never seen something so ugly, so angry-looking in all my life. It had this giant head pressed up against the glass, staring intently right at all of us. Its eyes had a horrifying orange and red glow to them, and these tiny black pupils that darted back and forth between us with an ominous grin. My mom is screaming. I'm frozen in place just like my father, totally traumatized at what we were seeing. Our window, this thing peered in at us from, was maybe only 4 feet off the ground. This being was crouching down to look at us, had the tips of its clawed fingers pressing against the glass. In such a way it was like it was telling us, taunting us, that the glass, this thin layer of glass, is the only thing keeping it from us, and it could break it at any time. I had never felt true fear like that, You could just feel the negative energy this thing gave off. I sensed and understood all of this in just a matter of a few seconds when the next big thing happens. Before I get to that, I need to express that this thing had full intent to want to scare us and or hurt us. The way it was grinning at all of us, like it knew we were trapped prey. I also mentioned how it was pressing against the glass with not only its face, but fingers too. You could see these thick black claws at the ends of each of its massive hands. They were very human-like. Made me think of the way a raccoon's hands are, actually. It's hard to write about, to be honest. I'm getting bad flashbacks thinking about it. I also should add a little more detail about its body, or at least what we could see. We could see that it was crouching, but was so large and it was dark out and couldn't make out details. I could tell this was large or larger than our carport, which is around 10 feet. It took up most of the window. It was so big. The head itself was so massive that I didn't quite understand how it could have fit on its body. It was pressing its face against the glass so hard that I'm shocked the glass itself didn't shatter. Its snout was large, and it didn't look like any regular dog. It had rows and rows of razor-sharp teeth. They were all so huge. Its face, though, its deformed, disfigured, demonic face, was so ugly. It didn't look right. It was just disgusting looking. It looked like it came from the pit of hell. I don't know if it was a demon, or a werewolf, or a dogman, or what. This was all happening in the span of around 5 seconds when we hear a person outside of our house begin screaming. This thing immediately looks over towards the road at someone or something, and in the blink of an eye, it's gone. It was gone so fast that we hardly even saw it leave. My mom is still screaming bloody murder, and my dad is just frozen, and I remember running to the front door and opening it. And I see this old man walking his dog, screaming, looking in the direction of our house. He was pointing and on the phone with the police, losing it. I don't really remember what happened after that, if I'm honest with you. If there was ever talk about what to do or what the cops said, it was pretty traumatizing for me, and I think my mind just kind of blurted out quite a bit of what happened due to the trauma. It's almost like the brain has an advanced coping mechanism for that kind of stuff. We moved out of that house about 4 years later. Never had any sort of scary thing like that happen again. We never saw or heard anything after that that was even remotely out of place. I really don't know what puts it. What does it equate to? I have no idea why it came to our window and stared at us. It was large enough. Size clearly wasn't stopping it from busting in and killing us. But it didn't. That's one of the things that really sticks with me. It grinned and taunted us through the glass, like we were just prey that it was playing with before eating. Then the neighbor screamed because he saw it, and that's why it ran. I sometimes think, had he not been out walking his dog and not seen the thing, what if it would have broken in and killed us? The feeling is horrible, but unique. I've never imagined having a feeling like you know somebody is coming to hurt you or kill you, but that was the feeling. It was different than fear. It was worse. I'm unsure of where it even came from. I can only speculate from the land next to us. However, we are a neighborhood, and the empty plot next to us has a sparse amount of trees, not a lot of brush and stuff to hide in. Beyond that is a commercial zone with stores, an auto shop, a thrift store, and a gas station. I haven't really written about this encounter before, but it's always haunted me, no matter how much I try to not remember it. Halloween can even sometimes be hard for me too. I'll see people in werewolf costumes, and I know it's all good and fun, but it just brings me back to that one memory. This is my dad's story when he was a teenager, and went hunting with his dad out in one of their many hunting spots that they would go to. They had a handful of spots and would often rotate between them. They would always come back with kills, and we were never without plenty of meat. It was my dad and my grandfather, and they brought their 2 coon hunting dogs with them. 2 coonhounds, whom were called Shyla and Dalgo. My father never really told me exactly where the spot is at. I know it's somewhere north of Elkton, around north of Route 68. I think it might even be off the 164, but I'm not 100% sure on the location though. They had so many spots in southern Kentucky. I just know they went deep into the bush, I was told. My dad was born in 1950, and during this time, it would have been in the mid-60s when this event happened. They didn't have an abundance of scary movies out yet. Very few. He had nothing to compare what he saw, other than a large wolf-like predator that walked on 2 legs. There was nothing else to compare it to, other than this giant wolf monster. But I'll get to that. They came to an area my father describes as open, but dense with brush, and were looking to set up camp for the night. I don't know if they were doing multiple days of coon hunting, or they were just using that as an excuse to camp and get out for a couple of nights and hike around. Either way, they were scouting for an area to set up camp when both of their coon dogs go crazy. They run off in one direction, down this long hill to the bottom. They're howling and barking and going crazy at the same thing. My dad and grandfather are trying to call them back, realize that these dogs aren't coming back and are going after something. It's like they were possessed, how they were acting. My dad and grandfather are running after them down this long hill. Can't see much in front of you because the forest was so thick. Starts hearing the dogs whimper and cry, and then silence. My father and his dad stood there listening intently at what was happening. They both began moving harder through the brush to get to Shyla and Dalgo, who are no longer making any noise at this point at all. Before they were going crazy and sounded like they were maybe 50 yards out. After a few more minutes of running, they came out of the thicker brush to a small slope, where they met face to face with a creature from their nightmares. Standing there in this small area between 2 trees was this wolf creature, standing about 9 feet tall on 2 legs. Clasped in its jaws was the body of Shyla, nearly hanging in 2 from being torn open, it looked like. Dalgo was being held in its left hand, his body also lifeless. My dad and his dad just stood there looking at this thing in front of them, and this thing looked at them. It didn't move for a bit, and just stared them down with the now dead dogs, one in its jaws, and the other it was holding intently. It squatted down briefly, and then jumped up into the trees and disappeared out of sight, with both dogs with it. Startled at what kind of animal they had just encountered, my dad and his dad ran for their lives. They weren't sure what to even do. It scared my dad to death. They got back to their truck after a while of running and got out of there. My dad told me he and his dad were so scared they didn't even fully process that their dogs had just been killed, taken by this creature. He starts asking his dad what they did see. Unsure of what it could be, but I don't think his father even had an answer for him. What do you even say after something like that happens? I'm in my 30s now, but the story I have for you takes place back when I had just turned 18. For my birthday, my dad had gifted me with a red 2001 Dodge Ram. Things drove slicker than butter. It was beautiful. I was also a senior in high school at the time, so this was going to be my truck to and from school, so I didn't have to ride the bus anymore. Yeehaw! I thought I was such a badass at the time. Now, during this, we lived out in a more rural area in southern Indiana. That's where my sister and I, who was also 16 at the time, similar to my age, went to high school at. I remember when my dad gave me the keys and how excited I was to be driving that thing. My sister was so excited for me. She demanded I took her for a drive in it, while she got to sit in the bed of the truck while I drove it. We hopped in and I took off. I just drove around for about 15 minutes around the area. Lots of lone roads, not a lot of houses. This was in August too, so it was very hot outside. I was loving the AC of the truck. Kept me nice and cool. My sister is sitting right next to the back window in the bed of the truck. At one point or another, she starts pounding on the window, and I reach with my one hand to open it. She starts screaming at me to haul ass, that there's a big, hairy werewolf running after us. I started to laugh at her, but my eyes naturally kind of just glided over to the rearview mirror, where to my horror, I discovered she wasn't lying. Coming up behind us on the road was this werewolf-looking creature. It was running on two legs like a man, but slanted forward, more like an athletic runner, actually. It was covered in long, shaggy dark hair, and had a long snout and big ears. This thing was fast. Feels like it caught up to us pretty quickly in the time I looked up and saw it. I gunned the truck up to 70 miles an hour, and eventually it couldn't keep pace with us. I didn't see what happened, but my sister says that after a couple of minutes, it darted off into the forest on the left side of the road. But it kept right up with my truck. It was so close to the bed of the truck, it could have just jumped up and gotten my sister, whatever the hell it was. We fly back to Mom and Dad's, and my sister is in the bed of the truck, hyperventilating. She was so scared. She was hardly able to talk or even breathe, and I tried my best to calm her down. My dad at the time just happened to come outside, noticed we were back from our little joyride, and walked over to ask us how the drive went. He clearly saw my sister in a full-blown panic, and that she couldn't catch her breath, and got concerned, asking what was the matter. I told him we saw a big black bear, and that it scared her. We're both trying to calm her down. She does eventually calm down, but doesn't tell my dad what we saw. We both knew he wouldn't believe us, especially telling him something that looked like a werewolf off the Howling chased after our vehicle for a couple of miles. Yeah, right. We'd have a better chance at getting him to believe that we had told him we were already Nazi scientists in disguise. Later that night, when it was just her and I asked her to recount exactly what she had seen running after my truck. I didn't want to convince myself that I made it up. I wanted to know for a fact that I wasn't crazy, and something really did chase after us. Her recount is exactly the same as what I recounted. We didn't just dream it up. We weren't drunk. We weren't high. We weren't intoxicated in any way. I don't know what it is that chased us. As far as I knew, it was just some large wolf animal. I never actually thought of werewolves and that thing being in the same category. It did resemble a werewolf like you would see in the movies and pop culture, but I can't get behind the traditional idea of it being a werewolf. Someone who shapeshifts into that and then chased us. I think it was just some unknown large animal that was maybe chasing us out of its area or territory. I don't know. I don't have answers. We had lived there for years in that area, been all around and never ran into any problems or ever heard from any relatives, mom or dad, or any friends of any sort of animal or creature that fit that description. Before I go though, I did want to point something out to you real quick. I mentioned the movie The Howling, which I've seen the whole series before. I've actually seen many werewolf and scary movies, but that's besides the point. Whatever animal chased my truck for a few miles did look similar to the werewolves from the movie The Howling, but still looked a little different. Nothing I've ever seen from a movie looks exactly like what me and my sister saw that afternoon. It was big. It was bigger than the werewolves in the Howling movie. It had that same kind of wild shaggy hair though. Very similar face. My sister got a much better look though than I did. I had to keep my eyes on the road and from crashing the car. She said she can't watch the Howling movies anymore because of that one day. It spooked her so bad. I think she thought it was a real-life werewolf, but I can't remember. My father, back when he was just a boy, went fishing with a close friend of his down at the Chambers Creek in Texas. I think it's near the town of Avalon, but I can't be sure. I would Google it. I really don't have any idea of where Chamber Creek lies in Texas, but other than just knowing of the name of the location. Anyway, he said he had spent the afternoon there fishing with his close friend. They both claimed they saw this 10-foot tall, bodybuilding looking creature, covered in black hair from head to foot, had the body of Conan the Barbarian, with the head of a wolf. This thing was in the creek, just came out of the water and walked into the woods nonchalantly after giving both my dad and his friend a quick glance, just as if to quickly notice that they were there, but to not do anything about it. This animal, creature, or being, whatever you wanted to call it, was hulking. You could see muscle definition underneath the fur. The thing was soaking wet, having just come out of the creek, but the fur was incredibly thick. It looked like the same fur a bear had, a very thick hide. It had a long snout with teeth protruding from the tops and bottoms of its jaws. It reminded him of a dinosaur, he told me. This happened at around 3 or 4 in the afternoon, so they saw just about every detail of this thing. He said that as it got out of the water and glanced back at the boys, it seemed kind of taken aback at the fact they were there, like it wasn't expecting them to be there, and it quickly left the area. He didn't mention anything about there being a smell, or anything about sensing this thing was there. Said the water was calm one moment, and then this thing comes out of it. It was hard on both of them. Scared my dad and his friend to death, but they both swear by the story is true. My dad's friend, who is still very close with to this day, told me some of the details as well. They both described the creature the same way, saw the same thing. They don't know where it came from. They had been fishing in this spot for hours when it happened, and out of nowhere, this thing comes billowing out of the creek, onto the bank of the creek and into the woods. They didn't stick around after that. They got out of there fast. I used to be a drug dealer back in the early 2000s and would drive to my different clients that I worked with. I only traveled by night to stay safe, or so I thought that was a smart idea during that time. In this encounter, I was headed north from Gatesville, traveling north on US 281. I was on my way, heading to Stephenville. I'm on the road and my high beams come across this shine in the ditch next to the road. I realized it was the reflection of fur shining with my high beams. And then as I get closer, I see it's this 8-foot tall hairy person standing in the ditch, facing away from my vehicle. As I got closer, this person, or so I thought, turns its head, and that's when I see that it clearly has a snout and a large amount of teeth and tall ears. The eyes were a glowing yellow-green and had this creepy, eerie look to them. It had a human-like face, but also canine-like, if that makes sense. A good blend of the two. Its upper body was very large and covered in hair. It was like I was staring at the body of a giant who works out extensively. I didn't see any hands, and I didn't see much of its arms or lower half of the torso. I couldn't tell where its legs were, and I couldn't tell what its tail or lower body looked like at all, or if it even had a tail. I can tell you it was tall to be popping up that high in the ditch like that. I thought I was seeing things when I kept rubbing my eyes and blinking, driving as slow as I can to make sure that I wasn't going crazy. I was really seeing this thing. I slowly pass it, and it keeps eye contact with me the entire time. As I pass it, I quickly look back down the road in front of me, and when I go check back quickly, it's nowhere to be seen. The rest of the way, I was trying to think, what on earth had I just seen? Did I witness some sort of escaped lab experiment? Was this an actual werewolf in the flesh? I have had that image burned into my mind forever. Who knows what it was doing in that ditch that night? I drove right by it.